Welcome to the show. Happy Thursday. It is Sandy and Shawn on Mile High Sports. That's Sandy Clough. I'm Shawn Drotar. Danny Bailey is the man behind the camera that makes everything work. Thanks for joining us, however you're doing that. Of course, if you've caught the program before, well, welcome back, and feel free to hit that subscribe button if you haven't had a chance to do so over there on YouTube, and you'll get the latest on what we'll talk about every day in advance and an opportunity to be notified as soon as we go live.
I mean to make this point and then move on.
Yeah.
But contrary to what people may perceive who are watching us, we do not have a one-hat rule. I don't think there's been a single day where both of us
That's a good point.
have worn caps.
Okay, well, tomorrow's Friday. Maybe Friday we'll
we may coordinate that, but
yeah. Okay.
Some people may be thinking there's some kind of in-house rule against both of us donning caps.
Right.
I have more hair, but that has nothing to do with it.
Does for me, obviously, on my
maybe
side
for
of it.
you.
Yeah.
It doesn't for me, and I had thought about wearing one today. In fact, a black one, just like yours.
See, we should have.
I forgot. I
forgot.
I got caught up in all the excitement.
All right. Well,
lots of news today.
There is lots of NBA news, and we'll get into the Denver Nuggets in just a little bit. But we'll start with the Denver Broncos. Obviously, a fascinating piece in The Athletic about Quinn Meinerz and the Denver Broncos offensive line. And it had me thinking right off the bat, when you look at all the new members, Sandy, of the offense, you're talking about a quarterback first and foremost, a center, tight end, potentially it's all returners, but nobody really cemented themselves. 3 new wide receivers, a couple new guys in the running back room. Not only do the Broncos have a lot of we don't know yets on offense, but even the returning offensive line.
I've never heard that expression.
Yeah.
They lead the league in
we don't know
yet.
Yeah, exactly. And they're right up there with the Carolina Panthers for sure. But I thought about Meinerz a little bit. And the idea that after moving on from Justin Simmons, I will make the argument that Pat Surtain is probably the Broncos' best player. Quinn Meinerz is probably the Broncos' second best player. And he's probably on offense by a wide margin, the most consistent performer that they have. Where game in and game out. In Powers and McGlinchey, both guys that were new last year, returners this year, not exactly bad players, but week to week, you didn't know, right? And Garrett Bowles would play well against Myles Garrett and then not play well against someone else. The only guy every single time in and out that was good tended to be Meinerz.
I would stipulate right here and now that with the possible exception of Surtain, who was, after all, a top 10 pick, first-round pick, the best draft pick George Paton has ever made as general manager of the Denver Broncos was Quinn Meinerz on the 3rd round.
Well,
can you think of a better one other than maybe Surtain? And I would have said at the time of the draft in question, the draft that involves Surtain, that was the first George Paton draft here. And one of the last, as it turned out. But I would have said Javonte Williams, off his rookie year performance, would have been, in terms of quality, moving up from 40 to 35 in the 2nd round to draft him, that Javonte Williams would be right up there with Surtain, because I thought Javonte Williams could be special.
Right.
And I don't think that anymore. Do I think he can be a starting running back in the league? Do I think he will be better than he was last year? Yeah, I think there's a good chance of that. I also think there's a pretty good chance that he won't even be the starting running back on opening day. Estimia will.
It's possible.
I think Quinn Meinerz is certainly the most intriguing draft pick because of his Paul Bunyan-esque background.
Yeah, and he's a likable guy. I mean, there's an awful lot to like about him, and the performance has been really good. Pro Football Focus had him ranked as the 2nd best run blocking guard in the NFL, and guards overall 3rd. So hasn't been a Pro Bowler, probably deserved to be a Pro Bowler, but the understanding is when you don't play for a team that's all that good, you're not going to get the attention. Sean Payton talked about it in the article, saying certainly he's a powerful, sticky run blocker. He does a lot of things extremely well. I think he loves it. He loves the process, which is half the battle. So I love that he's our right guard. That is interesting to me.
He's the best right guard, without a doubt, and maybe the best guard in the AFC. And I think Matt Millen, who is doing analysis on a late season Bronco game, made reference to as being the best guard in the NFL. Kevin Dotson of the Rams and Chris Lindstrom of Atlanta might want a word.
Right. Those are the two ranked ahead of him. But as you pointed out, both NFC guys.
Right. So as far as American Football Conference, as
good as they
get, NFL is concerned, I will concur with the idea that he is as good as there is at either right or left guard.
I like the quote by Peyton because when you talk about what Sean Payton is interested in, sticky and likes the process.
Yeah.
Sean Payton.
Well, and in the piece, they go through the process.
Right.
That he goes through. Even before a practice session, he'll meditate in full uniform before the practice begins at his locker, and he'll think about 3 things he wants to do at practice that day. 3 things he wants to improve upon that day in practice. It might be different from Wednesday to Thursday. It might be 3 entirely different things, but he's thinking before practice, not before a game, before practice. Sound like Iverson there.
Right.
Before practice, he's thinking about the 3 things he wants to work on and improve that day.
In sort of the granular way in which Pro Football Focus breaks things down from last year, they look at the run blocking game in a lot of different ways. And Dotson and Lindstrom, as you pointed out, overall, really, really good. And the 3 are the best in the run block as well. But then when you get into the idea of zone run blocking, Meinerz ended up 4th behind only Lindstrom, Feliciano of the 49ers, and then David Edwards in Buffalo, but he didn't take as many snaps. So I think you're talking about 3rd there. Yeah. Then in gap run blocking, again, 3rd behind Dotson, and then really 2nd because Rupcich of the Tennessee Titans wasn't in that much. So you're talking about no matter how you slice it, a top 3 run blocking guard, and all last year on run plays, Quinn Meinerz drew 1 penalty.
Right, and he allowed only 2 sacks all year long. And among 31 guards who qualified with at least 1,000 pass blocking snaps, that was the 6th fewest number of sacks allowed. It's a lot of guys.
Yeah.
And it allowed the 5th fewest pressures at 23. Here's what's confusing, though. Denver, as a team in 2023, 27th in sacks allowed, 52. 28th in pressure rate allowed, 41%. And maybe this is mostly Russell Wilson. They averaged 3.09 seconds from snap to throw, 29th. Now, again, that's Russell Wilson holding the ball.
Right.
Okay. But the reason they love Bo Nix is because he was sacked only 5 times and only threw 3 picks last year at Oregon.
Right.
That's what they like
and he gets
about him.
Gets the ball out quick.
Explain to me how bad, because we went through Meinerz numbers. You dove deeply into the metrics on Meinerz. How bad the other 4 guys had to be for Denver to rank 27th in sacks allowed and 28th in pressure rate allowed. How bad must the other 4 guys have been? Because Meinerz is top 3.
And one of those would be Cushenberry, who moved on to the Titans.
I know, and I still think they downgraded at that position, but it certainly speaks to Cushenberry, Bowles, and McGlinchey, and frankly, Ben Powers at left guard. It has to, doesn't it? The gap between the Meinerz individual numbers and the team stats on similar, if not identical metrics is massive, a massive chasm between, I mean, that's a redundant statement. Chasm is by definition massive.
Well, there are larger and there are smaller chasms. This would be the larger version.
This would be the largest possible chasm.
And you've talked about the idea of how much of a problem this is in no way an issue with Meinerz, but how much of a problem it is when your best player on offense is not only a guard, but your right guard. For a while, as they were building a little bit, the Indianapolis Colts had Quentin Nelson at left guard, a guy who was getting fitted for a gold jacket about 8 games into his career, and rightly so.
Even before his career began,
pretty much.
the moment he was drafted, gold jacket guy.
Yeah, I thought so. I didn't want
I
the Broncos to skip on
I
it,
did
but
too.
they did.
I didn't think the Broncos at that point were making a mistake in taking Chubb, but I agreed with the idea that Nelson was a gold jacket guy. The only problem I've ever had with Quentin Nelson is the position he plays.
Right.
It just isn't that impactful.
Well,
he can be the best in the game, and the Colts can miss the playoffs.
He's the
year after
blind
year after
side
year.
guard. Not that it matters that much anymore.
No, it doesn't.
It really doesn't matter that much. But so for Meinerz, is that any different? So I mean, given the right guard spot makes no difference to you.
Meinerz,
not that you're talking about switching him. He's among the best in the league by any metric.
I'm trying not to be cute here. He is so far and away their best offensive player, best offensive lineman, best guard in the AFC, in part because of his durability. Some of the other guys you mentioned weren't as durable, weren't nearly as durable, including Nelson, who gets hurt. This guy looks to be, now, no one's indestructible. Injury rate is 100% in the NFL. Mm-hmm. No one's indestructible. He will have injuries at some point. He will miss games at some point. But so far, he's been the picture of durability. He's as durable an offensive lineman as the Broncos have had. And of late, Garrett Bowles, I suppose, is close.
He has been.
And that's been the major selling point on Garrett Bowles, is that he plays all the games. Mm-hmm. Fans wish, and sometimes commentators too, wish he'd play better in all of these games and not just once a year against Myles Garrett. But Meinerz plays well against everybody, and he plays all the time.
And to get to Bowles' credit, look, it's the old joke, right? The best ability is availability, and he's certainly better than his backup. So, okay, it could be worse.
Not that they've tried to draft one.
No, not particularly. Although that's probably coming soon, as you and I believe. This is probably Garrett Bowles last year in the Denver Broncos uniform. Meinerz talked about, though, the fact that Bowles, to a lesser extent, Powers and McGlinchey were there, and we'll find out about center, the three-way battle between veteran Sam Mustipher and younger players Alex Forsythe and Luke Wattenberg. But Meinerz talked about it, said the biggest thing for our offensive line is having our continuity. When we're all going together, then things are going well for our offense. And, of course, that is the truth with offensive lines. But at the same time, free agency and a lot of other things have make it harder than ever before to keep an offensive line together, because those guys make the big, big, big bucks. And even though guard it makes less than they used to now, all of a sudden these are big numbers for offensive line, because teams are finally coming around to the idea that if you're going to spend what you spend on your quarterback, the guys that keep your quarterback upright ought to probably get paid too. The continuity for the Broncos will drop off a little bit, and it will change with the center position being someone new. But is there enough there for you to believe that, not necessarily for Meinerz, who I guess might be able to take a small leap forward, hard to, to go all Jay-Z, but what's higher than number one? There's only so much better you can get. But do you believe there is enough on this line with Powers and McGlinchey and Bowles to get better, even with a new center this year, than they were last year?
I think it's fairly low bar, but yes, I would hope they would improve over last year. I didn't think Powers was very good at all. I would hope in a second year, and again, same offense, same offensive line coach, same blocking patterns, I would hope they'd be better, because, as you pointed out, 4 of the 5 guys are returning, and Meinerz himself mentioned what a relief it was to have the same line coach coming back, the same system, same offense generally. They've made virtually no changes on the coaching staff, at least on the offensive side of the ball. Everybody's in place. So in theory, they should be better everywhere on offense than they were last year. And I mean, at each of the position groups, they should be better.
Well, we will talk a lot.
We will see if that, as Howard Cosell would have said, eventuates. Which I'm not sure is a word.
After certain,
but Howard,
it enters the vernacular. So when Cosell turned it into one, it becomes one. We'll talk a little bit more about the Denver Nuggets, quite a bit more, as a matter of fact. We'll talk about the draft. We'll talk about breaking it down with Vinny Benedetto and a new contract potentially for Jamal Murray. But first, if you want to get deeper into the Nuggets or the Avalanche or the Broncos, all sorts of options, even the Rockies, we know you're out there. We have options for you over at Mile High Sports.
We know that quite a few of you are subscribed to the Sandy and Shawn podcast, and we're very appreciative of that. Thanks for listening on demand whenever it fits your schedule. But we have plenty of other podcasts. We'll start with Brian Blackburn's Pickaxe and Roll podcast on the Nuggets, about whom we will be talking a great deal today, later on in the program. Arif Dean is always on the ice with the Avs, so check out his podcast, Hockey Mountain High. And if you're looking for baseball news, it's Drew Kreisman and the 20th and Blake podcasts, writing and talking about the Rockies. And the questions on the Broncos can be addressed to Troy Rank, our friend from the Denver Post. His Broncos podcast is featured on the Mile High Sports Podcast Network. All that and much more. Just search Mile High Sports wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, the Denver Nuggets drafted last night in the first round, and in the bizarre way the NBA still does it, as opposed to the NFL that just gave up on the idea that these things aren't traded and we'll deal with it later. Everyone but people who would have just been watching the television broadcast understand that the Nuggets traded up from their 28th pick to the 22nd pick with the Phoenix Suns. They gave up that 28, number 56 in the second round tonight, and 2 future first-round picks in 2026 and 2031, a cost that I believe, Sandy, you and I will discuss it, is essentially irrelevant to get the guy that they identified as front court help, DaRon Holmes of Dayton, 20.4 points per game, 8.4 rebounds a game, and maybe most importantly, 2.1 blocks per game, with a very good Dayton program that is easy to forget a couple of years ago was in the mix to win the whole thing when the tournament was wiped out by COVID. So that's a really good program over there at Dayton. The Nuggets had been attached to Holmes for a while, and they go ahead and they get their guy. I like the pick, not only for Holmes, but I like the pick for a couple other reasons. And one is the idea that Calvin Booth, again, he's identified his guy. He goes and gets his guy. And there is a part of that, I think, as a fan, as a Denver Nuggets fan, you should like, because you have a GM that is convinced in a single player and goes and gets it done. He understands that if these players don't work out, it's his job on the line, but it's the conviction there that I think is valuable. But you and I were talking about this before the show. We don't just pop up here and wing this for everybody, that perhaps the trade is indicative that, unlike last year, the Nuggets might have a young player that everybody's in agreement can step in and play.
Yes. As they say, plug and play. Now, that doesn't mean plug and start. It means plug and play. It means 15 minutes a game, whether DaRon Holmes II is very good or very bad. And of course, it'll be a lot better, to rephrase the old Dan Issel line on LaFonso Ellis. It'll be a lot better for everybody if he's real good. And I am being somewhat facetious, but at the same time, what I like most about Holmes is that he got better every year. He stayed at Dayton for a few years. He wasn't hop skipping all over the country.
And he worked on certain parts of his game.
Worked on his
jumps in different components.
He was challenged by his coaches at Dayton to work on his game, to expand his skills. And he did that. Very apparently, he developed a perimeter game, a decent three-point shot. Now, it's a college three-point shot, so he doesn't take a lot of them. So I'm not getting carried away with a 38, 39%
college three-point
number. I'm not going to get totally carried away with that. He's not going to be Kristaps Porzingis, 5 inches shorter,
right,
out there flinging threes. He's not going to be doing that. But he's a skilled interior player, scorer. His perimeter game is developing. He is not as quick on the perimeter as a defender as you might like, because obviously he's 6'9", he's not huge, but he's a tweener, and I think that can be a good thing. People use tweener now. It used to be a compliment to say somebody was a tweener. It used to connote versatility.
Right.
And now it's a knock. Because, well, he isn't a forward, he isn't a center. And I'm wondering why that is. because in the same breath, people talk about basketball today being a positionless game.
Right.
So why are they concerned whether a guy is strictly labeled a 4 or a 5, a power forward or a center? It doesn't matter. Tweener, to me, in his case, is a very good thing. He's a good finisher on a pick and roll. He's a decent post scorer at this point, with, again, a little bit of three-point range. He's a decent ball handler. He's not one of those guys who gets the ball and you're scared to death he's going to throw it away.
Mm-hmm. And it's one of the parts he worked on in college. You watch that get better.
And he's a very efficient scorer on a per minute basis, one of the best in the country this past year. For those who were looking for maybe a more athletic type to back up Jokic, he was third in the nation in dunks this past year.
And we're not talking about a guy that's that 6'9", 210 build that we've seen.
No.
Cody Williams.
He's 235, 240.
Right. He's got a man's body. This is the A10 player of the year, the defensive player of the year, consensus All-American second team, led the A10 in scoring. Pretty accomplished for a guy that you're getting at 22.
And the reigning defensive player of the year in the Atlantic 10.
Right. So, I mean, you're talking about a pretty talented guy. He had a chance to talk about getting picked by Denver after that happened.
Oh, yeah, that's perfect. Great fit. You know, I saw something that I get free sauces from Wendy's, so that's pretty cool. But other than that, I'm just excited to get out there and play. It's a great team, great organization for a reason, and I'm going to get better, and I'm going to keep going.
When you get to Denver, what's the first place you're looking for, the first thing you're looking for to make it feel like home?
Probably an inhaler, because, I mean, I heard that, what's it called, the altitudes. I'm playing, I'll be all right. Honestly, I don't know. Like, I'm just going to embrace it all and just be ready for it. I'm excited.
It is, you brought up the idea of Tweener, and I think that's a really interesting part of this equation, because what the Nuggets need from Holmes, because of, in part, the age of DeAndre Jordan, the missed draft pick of Zeke Naji, is you need not only backup minutes for Jokic, but you also need backup minutes for Gordon. So the idea of
what you mean they might play together, Jokic and Holmes?
Why not? And that's the beauty of it. Is okay. He maybe, let's say he is plug and play.
I thought there was some kind of rule against that.
Yeah. But at least you saw too many times, especially late, because Michael Malone didn't trust the guys that he had on the roster, that, you know, Aaron Gordon's playing big time minutes with the starters and the second unit. Jamal Murray's doing the same thing. And there is now the idea of Holmes being able to step in and he can play a little bit of 4. He can play a little bit of 5. And he maybe plays 16 minutes a game, but where he plays is dependent on the situation. And you have a capable guy who can do that and in theory step in and be helpful for that immediately. So this, to me, especially given up the paltry number of things they had to give up, is the right
seconds.
3 seconds. One of them in 2031
spots.
Who cares? Nobody even wants second round.
Nobody
picks.
knows what the NBA will look like 3 years from now,
right,
much less 7 years.
So it makes no difference. But when you look at this setup here for the Nuggets, they get the guy they wanted. They get the guy that they can believe. But as you pointed out, part of the reason that I think Holmes has been tied to the Nuggets, part of the reason that they were okay with giving up 3 second-round picks is because it appears that maybe among the young players, Michael Malone has seen enough of DaRon Holmes to say, nah, this guy I can use on day one. And no more of that push-pull where Calvin Booth picks Julian Strawther and Jalen Pickett and Hunter Tyson and hopes that Malone will use some portion of that crew. I think there's reason to believe in this case that Malone and Booth might be on the same page with this player. One of the reasons that the Nuggets had been tied to him for so long, and we're absolutely willing to cough up a couple of future seconds to get him.
One of my more sardonic Nugget friends, big fan, very knowledgeable, texted me immediately after the pick was made and suggested that DaRon make himself comfortable while he's nailed to the bench next year. Now, it was sarcastic.
Right.
I don't think meant literally, because listen, it's not 3 guys who basically came into the season. Maybe one of them was going to play and the 2 not so much, and maybe at least 2 are going to play in the G League from time to time.
And it can't be literally, because I'm sure that nailing players to the bench is against the CBA.
Some kind of
I haven't looked at all of it, but I feel like it's probably
not
not okay.
Somewhere you can't nail somebody, literally nail somebody.
Literally, right.
All right. But in this instance, I agree. And the defensive player of the year in the Atlantic 10 is an important point for Coach Michael Malone, I'm sure. Julian Strother was not the defensive player of the year in his conference coming out of Gonzaga. Tyson was not the defensive player of the year. Pickett was not the defensive player of the year, although they were all decent defensive players. None were known for it. This kid is. This kid's always been a good defensive player. He's improved the most on the offensive end of the floor, but he's always been a good defensive player. And the fact that he is athletic, especially around the rim, yes, Jokic makes the Nuggets look more athletic than they actually are because of his superb perception of the game and his ability to make passes and see things that no one else can either execute or see in advance developing. Gordon looks that way. This kid, I'd play him 4 or 5 minutes a game with Jokic. I would. And run the same stuff for him that they run for Gordon.
He's a great lob finisher.
He's a great lob finisher, and the Nuggets can throw the lob.
And
they
now
don't have an abundance of finishers at the rim, but this kid could be that kind of
Gordon
player.
Then can help with the second unit a little bit here.
He's not going to be rookie of the year. All the draft nicks last night that I watched seem to be saying that actually the number 2 overall pick, Alex Sarr, will probably be the rookie of the year.
Play more, a little closer
He'll
to Ray.
Play a lot. He wasn't the number 1 overall pick. And I understand Holmes is the 22nd overall pick. He won't be the rookie of the year.
He won't even play enough. No.
2024,
it's a start.
25. But I again want to remind people, point I touched on yesterday, but I want to expand it a little bit today. Derek White, our man, 29th overall pick. OG Anunoby, who just signed a contract that is reportedly worth a little more than the contract that has more or less been agreed to between the Nuggets and Jamal Murray.
We'll talk about that in a moment.
DeJounte Murray, much sought after, 29th overall pick. Pascal Siakam, 27th overall pick. Sabonis in Sacramento, not a top 10 pick, 11th overall. Massey in Philadelphia, 21st overall pick. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, like Sabonis, 11th overall, not a top 10 pick. And, of course, Brunson, we mentioned yesterday, of the Knicks, was picked in the second round, 33rd pick overall. Jamal Murray was 7th pick overall, went 4 spots after Jaylen Brown, who was selected number 3 overall by Boston. So I just mentioned 9 players of great distinction in the NBA, and one of them, Jamal Murray, was drafted in the top 10. That's it. The 8 others, White had contributed on a National Basketball Association championship team. And Anunoby, who's a big part of what the Knicks are hoping to do and challenging for a championship next year. Siakam, who I think was on that championship team in Toronto. And Kawhi Leonard had something to do with they're winning that championship too. But I mean, these are proven winners and terrific players, and they weren't drafted all that high. And some of them were drafted after Holmes has been drafted. So the devil's in the details. We'll see how it plays out. But to me, there's no question that right away he plays 15 minutes a game coming off the bench, backing up Jokic. And if he shows that he can play well enough, play him with Jokic.
Don't see any reason why you couldn't, of course. We'll talk a little bit more about this with our friend Vinny Benedetto of the Denver Gazette, but want to remind you that the Colorado Whiskey Fest, 4th annual already, is coming to the Douglas County Fairgrounds on Saturday, July 13th. Food, wine, beer, and spirits vendors will be on site, including more than 50 whiskey vendors. So if you love whiskey, this is your spot. The festival will take place from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m., features live music from the Kevin Austin Band and Mojo Filter, who was so great last year. They had to bring them back again. Tickets are available online, and if you use promo code MHS for Mile High Sports, you'll save $15. It's the Colorado Whiskey Fest presented by the Whiskey Cartel. More than 50 whiskey vendors on site. So if you're 21 and up, get your tickets today at whiskeyfestcolorado.com. And remember to use promo code MHS to save $15 on your tickets. That's the 4th annual Colorado Whiskey Fest coming to the Douglas County Fairgrounds on Saturday, July 13th. Obviously, a lot of things are going to change for the Denver Nuggets, starting with this draft. They do no longer have a pick in tonight's draft, at least currently.
No, I'm heartbroken.
Well, and it's not really that hard to get back into the second if you really want to, so you can stay mobile. But we'll have a chance to break this all down with the man who covers the Denver Nuggets for the Denver Gazette. That is our friend Vinny Benedetto. Vinny, thanks for joining us. The first thoughts about DaRon Holmes and the idea that the Nuggets got on Holmes bandwagon early, decided to make the trade to go up and get him. Is that indicative that what we saw from Strother or Pickett or Tyson, where they couldn't find a way to get on the floor, won't repeat itself with Holmes?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that, Calvin Booth kind of denied when we heard from him yesterday. He denied the reports that DaRon Holmes was a guy who received a promise from the Nuggets, but he did concede that he was a guy that the Nuggets had their eye on throughout.
Worst kept secret in the draft.
Yeah. Had their eye on for a while, and I think the even dating back to his freshman season at Dayton when he wasn't necessarily a massive draft prospect, but the improvement in skill over his sophomore and junior season, I think, kind of rocketed him up draft boards, and I think his positional versatility was attractive to Denver throughout the draft process, and that's something that should help him get on the court next season. Though I am a little concerned by Calvin Booth's answer in regards to his position moving forward, because it sounds like another not to give any Nuggets fans PTSD or anything, but sounds like another guy that Calvin Booth views as a power forward moving forward. But it might be a guy that Michael Malone uses as a backup center.
Right. Well, sure.
Given they still haven't addressed that, and Calvin mentioned again last night that DeAndre Jordan is a guy he wants back in Denver. So it does feel like the roster's filling up, and they still haven't addressed the true backup center spot, and they could probably also use another ball handler, and the roster's filling up. So I think it's going to be important that DaRon Holmes gets regular playing time next season. I'm just not sure what position exactly that's going to happen at.
Yeah, but in a positionless game, and the Nuggets are no different from a lot of other teams. I'm just saying, though he may not be here for much longer, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is a shooting guard, right? Doesn't shoot all that much, averages 10 points a game. Is considered a legitimate NBA shooting guard on 2 different championship teams, a starter on one, a heavily used player with the Lakers when they won the title in the bubble back in 2020. In that kind of scenario, but there's so many interchangeable parts. I think what you look at with this guy is athleticism and work ethic. And he seems to have both in abundance, no?
Yeah, and I think the work ethic, you can look that seems evident by his shooting numbers. He was a 14% 3-point shooter as a freshman at Dayton, got that above 30% as a sophomore, and then last season up near 39% from three. So I think that is a positive when you look at the work ethic. And then athletically, yeah, I mean, he's a guy who looks like a lob threat, which is something the second unit has relied on, having a more athletic center than obviously the starting 5 has. But I think the intangibles are something that are always going to be really important to this iteration of the Nuggets team, where culture and chemistry is something that seems like it's been really strong for the last couple of seasons. And from what we heard from Calvin, he has no issues with the intangibles that DaRon is bringing to Denver.
Vinny, you talked about the roster construction and the challenges therein about how this is going to break down. But I think when you look at the way the Holmes edition, we know that Reggie Jackson opted in. We will find out on Saturday if KCP opts in. The presumption at the moment, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that he will not. And now there are other reports, Shams Charania of The Athletic among them, that the Nuggets and Jamal Murray have basically agreed on a 4-year deal that will pay him $209 million, the max that he can get right now. Murray apparently sort of abandoning the idea that he'll be all NBA to get the bump next year. How tight does this make it for the Nuggets, especially if KCP walks? Can you envision a situation where this roster will be one unit that makes a lot of sense without Malone, the young guys? Or is this going to be Jokic, Murray, and to a lesser extent, Gordon and Porter Jr. dragging a motley crew across the line?
Yeah, I think it's closer to the latter, and I think that's just going to be part of the new CBA era we're entering into. It, it's not the days where you can have 3 or 4 max guys as long as ownership is willing to cut a massive luxury tax check at the end of the season. I think we're trending more towards an era where you have 2 max guys, a couple of medium or maybe a few medium-sized contracts, and then a lot of younger, cheaper players. So I think the way we're looking at the Nuggets right now is those 2 highly paid guys are going to be Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic. What that means for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope in the immediate future, it sounds like Calvin Booth is all right with the potential that KCP leaves in free agency. He mentioned Christian Brown is a guy that could plug and play, and I think the kind of the perceived willingness to let KCP walk also has to deal with that second apron, because if you do whatever you can to make Denver's offer more competitive in terms of maybe you give KCP an extra year, or maybe you go a shorter contract with a higher salary, either way that works out, they're going to be a second apron team.
Exactly.
And a second apron team. And then I believe right now they have 12 guaranteed contracts for next season. You add in DeAndre Jordan or Justin Holiday's return, that gets you 1 spot away. And if they brought back all 3, they'd have a full roster and they'd be a second apron team. So at that point, you're kind of locked into your roster for next season. If you've got bad injury luck, you're just in a really tough situation. So it feels like the route the Nuggets are most comfortable with right now is, if KCP wants to come back on a more team-friendly deal that could help them avoid the second apron, I think that'd be best case scenario for the Nuggets, but probably pretty unlikely. So I think right now the Nuggets are all right with losing KCP as long as that means they're not a second apron team, because then they've got the ability to use the taxpayer mid-level exception, which gets you a player worth, around $5.5 million. And then you can combine potentially Reggie Jackson and Zeke Naji's salaries in a trade. If you want to combine those guys and see if you can get maybe one more impactful player. So I think as tough as it might be to kind of understand immediately, I think the route that gives the Nuggets the most options to improve is probably letting KCP take a bigger deal elsewhere and maintaining some flexibility.
Vinny, that's a really interesting point, because I think when people look at this decision, which is really going to be KCP's, right? Caldwell-Pope has the option. He can decide whether to opt in or opt out. But when you start hearing second apron and luxury tax, the instinct is to say, oh, ownership isn't willing to pay for that. That's not really the case. It's that the limitations that the new CBA imposes on second apron teams are so incredibly restrictive that basically you have to be like the Boston Celtics or the Minnesota Timberwolves, both over the second apron already, teams that are okay with going with exactly the same roster that they have. But when you're over that second apron, your ability to go around and make trades, to do all the other things you can do to at least even moderately improve your roster, they vanish. So even if KCP were to leave, this isn't about Nuggets ownership not being willing to pay it. It's about retaining the flexibility to improve your roster. And that's a pretty important point.
Yeah, especially I think for this ownership group who has, I think, at times rightly been criticized by the fan base for not doing, whatever is in their power to make this team as competitive as possible. But I think it's also important to note that this second apron and all these restrictions are a new development in the league as of, about a year. And so I think teams are really trying. I guess I am surprised by how scared teams are of being a second apron team if they can at all avoid it. So I think this is kind of going to be a feeling out process for teams over the next year or two. Maybe it becomes a thing where if you want to have, one of the most talented rosters in the league, you're just going to have to risk it and be a second apron team. And if you feel like you're set with, like I mentioned earlier, 2 guys on max contracts and a couple medium-sized contracts, then maybe you can be a contender and just be one of those first apron teams and maintain some flexibility. But I think this is going to be a really interesting kind of next season or two, just to see how second apron teams do operate throughout the season and how that impacts other teams' willingness to exist in that space moving forward.
You mentioned a few minutes ago that Calvin Booth, and I agree with you, at the post-mortem press conference following the second round 7-game series loss to the Minnesota Timberwolves, seemed perfectly comfortable with Christian Braun starting next year. Michael Malone didn't seem nearly as comfortable with that notion. Do you believe that Malone and Booth are simpatico as far as DaRon Holmes is concerned, and simpatico with the idea of giving up the rest of the draft this year and a couple of future seconds, that they're both on board in a way that maybe they aren't quite yet with Christian Braun?
I think we haven't heard from Malone yet, and probably won't for a little while now. So I can't speak to whether they're on board with, playing him right away. But I think the idea that including this year's second round pick and a couple of future second round picks had to be the right move. Because kind of like I was mentioning earlier, the roster is filling up quickly. And, last season they gave their second round guys guaranteed contracts for a couple of seasons at least. And it didn't turn out very well. I think if they could have had one of, Jalen Pickett or Hunter Tyson on a 2-way contract instead last year, that probably would have been beneficial to the team. And so you look at what would have been a really late second round pick this year. I'm not sure what you're getting in terms of being able to help the team immediately. It might have been, kind of a lottery ticket on a backup guard. Maybe you get lucky there. But it'll be interesting to see how they view DaRon, or how Michael Malone views him in terms of positional play or role next season. Because Calvin Booth was pretty adamant yesterday that he's a guy that's got to be given an opportunity to play at the start of next regular season.
We had talked a few weeks ago in speculating about whom the Nuggets might draft. We had talked about Tyler Kolek from Marquette, the guard from
who's still
Marquette,
available,
who's still there, wasn't drafted in the first round at all. Do you think there was ever any consideration on the Nuggets' part that might have produced a different outcome from the one we saw last night? Was Kolek ever any kind of consideration as a potential Nugget draft pick?
I don't know if he was in consideration. It feels like they were pretty, once DaRon Holmes got to 20 and they could make a reasonable move to get up there, it felt like that was always going to be.
Well, do you think they were afraid that Minnesota would take Holmes at 27? Because I can't imagine that they would. They have 3 centers.
But Calvin Booth did talk about the idea that perhaps a division rival might have an interest in the same
Minnesota
guy.
would be a division rival.
Mm-hmm. And I think the idea with Minnesota, they're in a similar financial spot to Denver, where I don't think they're going to be able to keep Rudy Gobert, Karl Anthony Towns, and Naz Reid together way down the road. So maybe that would reset their kind of their group of bigs. But I think the Knicks would have been a really good fit for DaRon Holmes. I don't think they're going to be able to retain Isaiah Hartenstein after the OG Anunoby extension. Phoenix maybe even could have used a big behind Nurkic. So Milwaukee even, I just think there were a group of teams that made sense there. And if you're Calvin, obviously worst case scenario would have been waiting until pick 27 and then having your guy taken. And then what do you do at 28? And maybe if that's the case and you don't want to gamble on, some of the one and done guys or the younger guys left, then yeah, maybe you end up taking a guy like Tyler Kolek at 28, or my preferred pick, Baylor Shireman.
Yeah.
Go Blue Jays.
You had a lot of company in that regard.
Yeah. So, if they couldn't have addressed the need for another big, I think kind of that older, high skill kind of guy who can run a second unit would have been the obvious pivot point if they couldn't have gotten a big. But it just felt like, everything that came out had the Nuggets linked to DaRon Holmes, and if not him, maybe then a different player who could address the backup big.
That man is Vinny Benedetto, the Nuggets lead writer over at the Denver Gazette. Make sure you check out everything Vinny puts together. You see his address there on social. Give him a follow for all of the latest. It will be a fascinating offseason, and it starts right now. As he mentioned, the roster is filling up quickly. Reggie Jackson opted in. We'll find out about KCP in a little bit. You'll want to stay on top of all of it with Vinny, so send him a follow and check out everything they're doing over the Denver Gazette. Terrific coverage of all your local sports teams. Vinny, appreciate it. I know it's a busy time for you. We really thank you for being able to step in for a couple of minutes with us today. Thanks a lot.
Appreciate it, guys.
All right. Thank you, Vinny Benedetto from the Denver Gazette, joining us. The Nuggets do not have a second round pick in this draft. Now, after giving it up, Calvin Booth said he did not anticipate getting back into the second round. But of course, those things can be subject to change. We'll talk more about the NBA draft, especially the local angle of it, in just a moment. But I want to remind you that if you have heard over the years about the Denver Athletic Club and thought, I wonder what that's all about. Well, if you're looking for the perfect place to work, play, exercise, and socialize, you look no further than the Denver Athletic Club, right here in the heart of downtown Denver. As a DAC member, you enjoy top-notch amenities like a full fitness center, licensed childcare center, a spa, massage, Pilates, golf simulator, and more. But what truly sets the DAC apart, what's kept it going for more than 100 years, is its vibrant community. The member-owned club is all about you, offering year-round social events, co-working, dining, and fun for the entire family. The Denver Athletic Club is truly a club for your whole life. And now, for a limited time, new members pay nothing in initiation fees. So go check out the Denver Athletic Club and join today. That's the Denver Athletic Club in the heart of downtown Denver. Speaking of the heart of Denver, the capital of Colorado, good news for Colorado products. Both the State of Colorado products in last night's first round of the NBA draft, Sandy. CU basketball under Tad Boyle. We know about KJ Simpson is still out there, but now expected to be drafted in the second round. Cody Williams, originally in the mix, I guess, before the injury, for people that love the overall talent package, for being in number 1, still drafted at number 10 was often mocked to the Lakers, but the Lakers surprisingly found Dalton Connect from Prairie View High School up in Henderson and Tennessee, dropped to 17, where the Lakers very wisely scooped him right up, leaving De Silva at 18 for the Magic. So the state of Colorado ends up with 3 of the first 18 picks. The University of Colorado, 2 of the first 18 picks. First time ever in CU basketball history that they've had 2 first-rounders in the same draft. And as we mentioned, Simpson expected to be drafted tonight. Colorado basketball is for real.
No doubt. Absolutely no doubt whatsoever about that. What surprised me about the draft, and it's been going on for a few years, I get it, and Vinny referenced it, maybe indirectly. There seems to be this obsession with drafting teenagers now that I don't remember ever having.
You want to find a superstar?
A tiebreaker, at the very least, and sometimes more than a tiebreaker, between a guy who's 19. I mean, Cody Williams is what? 19.
Right.
How on earth does a team in its right mind draft Cody Williams ahead of Dalton Connect? I'm sorry. And it wasn't just Utah, by the way, although Utah did actually take Williams. As you point out, I believe that a lot of the Lakers stuff you read about and hear is nonsense. It's hype. I don't believe they do anything but spin publicly as an organization, whether it's the new head coach, the general manager, the players, whomever. However, I think they were genuinely shocked, and pleasantly so, that Dalton Connect was there for them to draft at 17. And that in turn gave Orlando, as we had suggested earlier this week, the perfect opportunity, a very good Orlando team as it currently stands, to get Tristan Da Silva.
You want plug
from
and play
Colorado
guys?
at 18. And Tristan Da Silva right now is a much better player than Cody Williams. So two guys who went 17 and 18 went that late because they're in their 20s. They're fairly far into their 20s, as a matter of fact. Cody Williams gets picked because he's 19 years old.
Right. As a matter of fact, in the references to both players, Da Silva and Connect, by across the board, the things that quote unquote knocked them down the chart for both of them,
they're too old.
Age, not game, not accomplishments, age. And I guess, you could help me with this. I know where it started in modern NBA basketball. And I guess when I say modern, I'm being really recent. But obviously, Moses Malone, one of those guys that was drafted very young, and then there was a gap. And then, of course, the NBA for a long time wouldn't let you draft those guys. Right? But when you had the Kevin Garnett and LeBron James of the world popping up and turning into superstars, basically, then teams decided they were going to trip all over themselves and try to find potential superstars. And unless there was a ready-made superstar in college, and the presumption was if you were good enough to be one in college, you wouldn't be in college, you'd be in the draft. Then I think that's where this has come from, because now in the early picks of the draft, it is all about betting on the come, right? It's all about assuming that these guys will be future superstars. But for every time you run into a guy like that, you also run into a Nicolas Skidishvili, a Bruno Caboclo. I can go over and over and over about young teenage players that figure, well, they'll project as this. And I'm with you. Now, I guess it depends on where you're at. If you're a team that is light years away and you're starting a rebuild and you won't be good and you believe this person may be a top 15 player in the league, okay. But for the most part, if you're a Denver Nuggets, if you're a Lakers, if you're a Magic and you Knicks and you're ready to win now, go get a guy that can help you win now. And I think when you look at the top of the NBA draft, it is kind of interesting year after year after year to see the Cody Williams play in the draft in a spot notably higher than their own teammate who was demonstrably better. Cody Williams was the third best, maybe the third best Colorado Buffalo. They're looking at raw talent as opposed to actual basketball skill and presuming that they will grow into it. But that's always a risk.
I think his brother helped him.
Absolutely.
By being such an outstanding player early on for the Oklahoma City Thunder, the first place Oklahoma City Thunder this year in the Western Conference. That helped Cody, that his older brother, who wasn't necessarily viewed with the same kind of enthusiasm as Cody is viewed at the time that he was drafted.
Right.
I think that had something to do with it. And Oklahoma City, Utah do occupy the same division. I know divisions don't mean anything now, but if you're in Utah's position, you get a slew of draft picks. You're not going to be even a play-in team next year. San Antonio has a better chance to be a play-in team next year than Utah does.
I agree with that. The second round of the draft underway now. Of course, the first pick of the second round goes to Toronto. There was Jonathan Mogbo coming out of San Francisco. Kyle Filipowski from Duke.
They've started.
Joins Cody Williams on the Jazz. Tyler Smith goes to the Bucks. Tyler Kolek stays in division, if we cared about such things, goes to Chauncey Billups. Portland Trail Blazers.
Yeah. Portland had a good draft.
Yeah.
And I think they're done.
For the second, Portland has the 10th,
one more pick.
Okay. And then the fifth pick, maybe notable because the fifth pick in the second round, for the second year in a row, a guy from Kansas probably entered the draft a little too soon and isn't entirely ready. Johnny Furphy.
I said it months ago.
Yeah.
I said all this talk, and
Furphy ends up with the Spurs.
He was a lower grade Cody Williams. Actually, I think he's younger than Cody Williams. Hasn't been playing basketball for all that long. Certainly not against top flight competition. I thought it was beyond silly that he made the decision to come out.
And now he will not have a guaranteed contract.
And he won't have a guaranteed
because he's a
contract.
second rounder.
And if he had stayed one more year,
Certainly would have
he
been a
would have
mid-round
played a
first.
lot, and he would have been a first-round pick and
Mhm.
possibly a lottery pick.
Yep.
And he lost a lot of money by coming out a year too soon. I mean, he'll make more money this year. Well, I don't know, but
Yeah, you don't
there's
know.
always NIL money
Kansas has got some
too
NIL.
at Kansas, but it won't hurt Kansas that much. And I'm a Kansas fan, so I'm not talking about it from the point of view of having rooting interest in this. But I said months ago it was a mistake, and I even thought Cody Williams could have stayed an extra year, become a 20-10 guy.
Would have been a lock lottery. Well, he's a lottery pick anyway, but would have
maybe
been a top
healthier
5 guy.
player, gotten stronger, and he would have been a top 5 pick. Now he goes 10th, so I'm sure the Williams family,
I think if you go in the
including
lottery,
Cody Williams thinks he made
it was probably the right
move
choice.
in coming out. But Johnny Furphy didn't go in the first round.
No.
Filipowski didn't go in the first round either, and rightly so. And I thought this is going to contradict what I've been pointing out, that I thought the worst pick of the first round was Zach Edey at number 9. And I know he's an older player and he has worked hard and he's improved certain aspects of his game. But for Donovan Clingan, who's a much better prospect,
With an NBA body.
he goes number 7 to Portland, which I think is a great pick.
Mhm.
Great pick.
Portland, and then
one of the best 2 or 3 picks of the first round, if not the best pick of the first round.
And then you get Kolek in the second.
That's why I'm saying they've already had a good draft, even if they do take one more pick, as they're scheduled to do. But Clingan going 7, and then I mean, they did play against each other in the national championship game. Who did you think was the more impactful player?
Close.
Not even close. And I'm not knocking Edey. Clingan had a lot more around him as the draft unfolded last night. You could see how good UConn was last year, and even losing some of these guys, Castle and Clingan in particular, who were 2 of the top 7 picks in the draft and 4 and 7 overall. They're still going to be good next year, but Clingan is much better, and he goes 7 and Edey goes 9, and that was a jaw dropper for me. And I must say, the international players I'm not as familiar with. I'll take it on faith that Alex Sarr might right now be the best of the bunch. But they're calling it the French Revolution.
Well, yeah,
and it certainly appears to be that. And the other thing about the European players, drafting them as teenagers, they're much better trained and developed than players are here in the United States.
For a team game, for team-styled games.
Yeah, well, yes, but even in terms of individual skills, passing, shooting, rebounding. Jay Billis made a great point on ESPN the other day. He said in the United States, when players start to develop, big men, you're on this end of the court. Little men, you go to the other end of the court. They don't do that in Europe.
Right.
Everybody trains together.
Drills.
Same drills.
That's why you're getting better.
Doesn't matter if you're 6'1" or 7'1", you're doing the same drills. It is so much a superior way of developing talent than we have here.
Especially
and that explains why international players are going earlier in the draft. And
what do we call the
some
NBA
of the college players are like Furphy, who aren't much younger or older,
but not nearly as well-rounded.
They're not as well-rounded, even though Furphy was an international prospect coming to Kansas. He should have stayed one more year. Filipowski should have stayed one more year. Filipowski's like Edey. As college players, they're pretty good. Neither one of them can defend. They're not mobile. They're not rim protectors. And in this day and age, I'd rather have a DaRon Holmes, to close the circle on this conversation. I'd rather have a DaRon Holmes than a Filipowski or even a Zach Edey.
And look at the gap there. 1 second rounder, one guy at 9, and the Nuggets get their guy at 22. And as you talk about that, I think it's a great point.
Holmes will be the best of the 3.
We increasingly talk about the NBA as positionless, right? So again, that European style of everybody goes on the same drills. So you have big men that are better passers. You have guards that are oftentimes better rebounders. Everybody does everything. And for a positionless league, that's more valuable. And maybe there's an adjustment in the way that that America, when it comes to with younger players, will probably have to catch up a little bit because Europe, being comparatively newer to the game, post Dream Team bringing it over there and really turning it into what we see today, they've iterated on it and changed it. And now it's funny to watch it see all the way come back around to the NBA and change the NBA game. It's really, really fascinating. But good news for the University of Colorado. Congrats to Dalton Connect, Prairie View High School. Represent. Great job there for Connect going to the Lakers. Yeah, it is. It is. And I think all the players landed into good spots. Even Cody Williams on a team that is a ways from competing.
Oh, yeah.
Is not expected. De Silva will step right in and be helpful. Connect will step right in and be helpful. And we think, at least for the Denver Nuggets, DaRon Holmes will step right in and be helpful. We will talk more about the Nuggets, of course, on tomorrow's program. The draft does continue as we speak. We'll find out if the Nuggets hop back in. We don't expect it, but, anything is possible. But we will move towards the NHL, where some Colorado Avalanche players are up for some very big awards, one of which they've won, one of which they notably haven't. But first, a word from the man you get to hear, at least for the man you get to hear on Wellness Wednesdays right here.
Here on Wellness Wednesdays at 5:30 on Mile High Sports Radio. Every Wednesday, you get your checkup from the neck up from Dr. Rick Perea, one of the foremost performance psychologists in America. I had a chance to spend some time with a good doctor today. He is available for people in all walks of life. You can be a corporate executive, you can be an adolescent, you can be an everyday worker. It doesn't matter. All you need to know about Dr. Rick Perea is that he has worked with and around the best here locally with the 2015 world champion Denver Broncos, with the Colorado Rockies the following season as the Rockies prepared for a 2-year run to the baseball playoffs. That wasn't that long ago, and Dr. Perea helped get them there. And, of course, the world champion NBA title holders from 2023, the Denver Nuggets. Rick Perea worked with them, worked with the likes of Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic and Michael Malone at length. So the number to call, if you're interested in Rick Perea's advice, counsel, and you hear a lot of it every Wednesday right here on Mile High Sports Radio, 720-287-0933. That's 720-287-0933. Look them up at think1number4u.org. That's think14u.org.
The NHL draft will be tomorrow in Vegas from Sphere. Of course, that will be interesting to see as it shakes out. But tonight, the NHL Awards occur. Now, most of the awards have actually been handed out, and a couple will be handed out a little later, specifically the Willie O'Ree Community Hero and the Award of Excellence for E.J. McGuire. But the big ones you're aware of, the Calder Trophy for the Rookie of the Year, no Avalanche available for that. The Vezina Trophy, no Avalanche available for that, for Best Goaltender. But the other three, the Hart, of course, the equivalent of the MVP, Nathan McKinnon's in that. The Norris, the defending holder of the Norris, is one Cale Makar, the Avalanche, and he's back as one of the 3 finalists. And the Ted Lindsay Award, which is sort of an interesting overlap, but it's the most outstanding player award, but that's voted by the players, by the NHLPA. Nathan McKinnon is involved in that as well. It is McKinnon's 3rd time to be a Hart finalist. The other players, Nikita Kucherov, who led the league in points, and the incomparable Connor McDavid. But as you've pointed out, McDavid's case, it is a regular season award. It's voted on before the playoffs begin, where McDavid had the 3rd most points in the history of the Stanley Cup playoffs, leading Edmonton to the Stanley Cup final, where they ended up losing in Game 7 to the Florida Panthers.
And then proceeded to fire their general manager.
That's a rough
Thanks
road,
for the
isn't
memories.
It? Holy moly.
Ken Holland, who's a Hall of Famer, even now, got resigned today. They said it was mutual. Don't they always say?
Always
these
say
days?
it's
It's always mutual, by mutual consent. But yes, those are the finalists, and I said it, and I'll restate it here. I think this will be the year for Nathan McKinnon to get the Hart. I think the Norris will go to Quinn Hughes of Vancouver over Cale Makar. The Ted Lindsay finalists, pick any one of the 3 of them. I think Austin Matthews.
It's going to go to Austin. I feel it's going to go to Austin
because of all the goal scoring.
He led the league in goals. Yeah.
And my only reservation about any of these awards is that Jared Bednar has never been, I don't believe, a finalist.
He's never even been a finalist
Coach of the Year.
for the Jack Adams
Not that he
Award.
deserves it this year. He doesn't deserve the Jack Adams Award this year necessarily. There are a number of wonderful candidates, including, and again, it's a regular season award.
Right.
But in the regular season, how could you sneeze at what the Florida Panthers did? The second best team in the Eastern Conference, much improved overall
and
from
NHL,
the regular season version of last year's Florida Panthers. And Paul Maurice could have been Coach of the Year.
Wasn't even a finalist. And the way the
hockey
does
he
it,
isn't a finalist either.
the way the NHL does it is kind of weird. They spread these out over time, and the Jack Adams Award for Coach of the Year was over a month ago. Rick Tocchet of the Vancouver Canucks ended up winning that award,
and rightly so.
Sure, because Vancouver ended up with the
surprise first place finisher, beating
over
out
Edmonton. So I get that, but yeah, it is interesting to see how Bednar never seems to be included in this. And maybe it's because, well, you have the reigning Norris Trophy holder who's a finalist again, and a guy who's been up for the Hart Trophy as a finalist 3 separate times. Yeah. Maybe you get overlooked because of the talent. Right. Perhaps that's something to do with it. But this year, when you look at those awards, and let's start with the Hart, because I want to believe that McKinnon will be recognized for it. I think the difference, to my mind, is the plus minus when you look at points on the year, which a lot of people do. Kucherov led the league in 81 games with 144. McKinnon didn't miss a game. He had 140. Now, McKinnon did have a 50-goal season. Kucherov had more assists. But the difference, to my mind, is the very simple number that the plus minus. Kucherov was plus 8. McKinnon was plus 35. And out of the league's 15 leading scorers, nobody had better than 35. The other guy that had it, Connor McDavid. So I think that's the difference maker for McKinnon. But there's a part of me that'll believe it when I see it, because I know they love giving this award to the person who just scored the most points. And the Avalanche did not finish first in their division. They finished third in their division.
No, Tampa didn't either.
They didn't, right. But again, that's not a difference maker to maybe overcome it. It's either that plus minuses or the fact that Nathan McKinnon has been so good, so consistently in the last few years, that he's probably simply due. And I certainly hope that's the case. But you feel confident that that's what we'll see? What makes you confident?
Reasonably confident. And I think also the fact that he's come so close other times and could have won it once before. I think that the idea that I think throughout the regular season, he's the best all-around player.
And I think you could easily make that argument.
And he had the most impact on his team, which if people really looked at the Avalanche, Makar didn't have his best year this year. Rantanen did not have his best year this year. The one guy who carried his team the furthest was McKinnon. Of the finalists, of the 3.
Are we both of the belief, I most certainly am, that this year Cale Makar is not going to win the Norris? To my mind, that'll go to Quinn Hughes, because I talked about the top 15 scores. The guy sitting there at number 16 is a plus 38, better than McKinnon and McDavid, and that's Hughes. So, I mean, Hughes had an extraordinary year. It's not as if Cale Makar was bad by any stretch. But if there is one of those years where, again, on a Vancouver team that I think surprised, Hughes had 92 points, Makar had 90. But Hughes was the plus 38, Makar plus 15. Right. I think that Hughes' team was better. And in part, you could absolutely say that Hughes was a big reason why. I think that Hughes probably takes the Norris this year.
I agree.
And I don't really have a problem with it. I don't think that's unreasonable. But I think these two guys might be,
again, regular season award,
of course, the
first place team gets the edge.
Yeah.
But again, I
think Hughes actually just had a better year than Makar.
Well, I agree with that. And I think when it's McKinnon, Kucherov, and McDavid, I look at how the teams did in the regular season. And the Avalanche had the best team of those 3.
If McKinnon doesn't end up getting it, does that say anything about him? Does it say anything about the process? Does it matter? Over in the Denver Post today, Corey Masisak had a terrific interview with Bruce Boudreau. Boudreaux coached the Capitals at one point, has seen some goal scorers. That Alexander Ovechkin fellow had his quote in the Post saying, "When I coached against him," meaning McKinnon, "I would forget to coach at times because I would just watch him. Honest to God. To me, he's the most exciting player to watch ever. The combination of speed, strength, power, even some meanness. To have all those traits in a center like that, I just think he's one of the guys that will go down as one of the greatest players ever." That's coming from a guy who knows what he's looking at. Most exciting player to watch ever. That's a strong statement.
And he's not saying he's the best player.
No.
But he's saying the most exciting to watch, and he is the most exciting to watch. Now, the talent that McDavid possesses is unsurpassed. McDavid is an all-time great, whether he wins a Stanley Cup or not. And I think the chances are now that he won't. I think this year was probably the best chance they'll have. They did have an injury to Kane, but Kane's getting older.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's always
Draisaitl, McDavid was hurt early in the season, and that probably cost him a shot at yet another Hart Trophy.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, they're a healthy team in the playoffs, except for Kane. And that was toward the end of the playoffs where he was not able to play at all. I just think there has to be some acknowledgement of the unique way that McKinnon plays the game. The combination of speed and power is overwhelming. McDavid dominates in a different way. But of the two, no question about it this year, the better goal scorer is McKinnon.
We will find out tonight.
McKinnon. And Kucherov's not a center. He needs somebody setting him up for all those goals.
Kucherov, by the way, you talk about the full all-around game, and I'm not knocking Nikita Kucherov. Every team in the league would love to have him. He took 4 face-offs this year.
Yeah.
4. Nathan McKinnon took over 1,300 face-offs.
And that is not McKinnon's strength, by the way.
No,
it's not.
But obviously, that's the idea is you're doing more. Nathan McKinnon does more. Hopefully, that ends up being the case. We'll find out tonight. And, of course, the Avalanche will find out whether they take any of that hardware back. But tomorrow is the NHL draft. A quick thought about that. We'll dig more into that tomorrow, Sandy. But there are reports that the Avs could do what they've done before and perhaps package a player and the 24th overall pick to trade. One of the reports is because of the emergence of Casey Middlestat, that might be Ross Colton might be one of those guys with 3 years left at $4 million per that could be packaged with number 24 to get a more impactful player. Would you like to see them?
Not especially.
I don't want to see Colton go. If you can get someone who can provide you immediate help, you're not going to get a star swapping number 24 at all. But can you find a consistent lower 6 forward at 24 that can step in with the Avalanche and help right now?
No.
You don't think you can do it?
No.
I would
not from what I've heard about this draft. No.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the thing. If you're the Avs, you just have to probably grab the old best player available and wait a couple years. But it doesn't seem as if the draft for the Avs is going to bring you anything. And by the way, the next pick they have after the first is the 4th round. So, I mean, you can forget that.
That's what they've done in trying to build a championship contending team, which they have had now for at least 4 years.
Right. They're going to try to keep that window propped open tomorrow. We'll talk more about that. The Denver Nuggets have a new player, that is DaRon Holmes, tweener in a good way, can play front court minutes at center and a power forward. The Nuggets believe that he can be a plug-and-play player, at least off the bench, hoping to spell minutes for Nikola Jokic and maybe for Aaron Gordon as well. And I think the most exciting thing about it is the point that Sandy brought up, that perhaps since the Nuggets were willing to trade up to get him, even though the cost was relatively minimal in NBA terms, it might mean that Michael Malone and Calvin Booth are on the same page with their new addition. We'll find out. The draft continues as we speak. We'll break it down tomorrow, get into the NHL awards and the NHL draft, and have more for you on the Denver Broncos as well. Thanks to Vinny Benedetto of the Denver Gazette for joining us. You can catch him over at the Denver Gazette and follow him on social at V Benedetto. It's always good to talk to him. Danny Bailey in the booth is the man that makes everything work. Always appreciate Danny, and we appreciate you. No matter how you caught the show, whether you watched it right here on YouTube, and you can click that little subscribe button right down there below us. It's red. See where I'm pointing? It's right down there. You can click that, and you can get the latest from the program, and we'll let you know what we'll be talking about, and it will alert you when we're going live. And of course, you can always catch it on demand any way you'd like. However you caught the show, we appreciate all of you. We'll be back at it tomorrow. For Sandy Clough, I'm Shawn Drotar, and this is Mile High Sports.